Imagine a ruler so powerful, he declared himself a god, and he didn't care how disgusted the people of Rome were by his habits as long as he was feared. Emperor Caligula's reign was full of shocking and bizarre behaviors, from his disturbing relationships with family to his outrageous defiance of the Senate. In this video, we're diving into the weird habits that made Caligula one of history's most infamous figures. Caligula's childhood and ascent to power. Gaius Julius Caesar. Augustus Germanicus, better known to history as Caligula, was born on August 31st, 12 AD in Antium, southern Rome. From birth, Gaius was deeply entwined with one of the most powerful and illustrious lineages in Roman history. His father, Germanicus, was not only a celebrated general revered for his victories and charisma, but also a key figure in the Julio-Claudian dynasty. As the adopted son of Emperor Tiberius, who himself had been adopted by Augustus, who was the first emperor of Rome, Germanicus held a central position in the imperial family. His legacy loomed large over his son's future. On his mother's side, Gaius also carried immense prestige. Agrippina the Elder, his mother, was the granddaughter of Augustus through her mother Julia, and the daughter of Marcus Agrippa, Augustus's closest ally and architect of many of his military triumphs. This dual heritage linked Gaius to both the founding and the ongoing leadership of the Roman Empire, ensuring that he grew up in the shadow of power, expectation, and influence. As a young boy, Gaius enjoyed the privileges of his lineage, often accompanying his father on military campaigns. It was during these excursions that soldiers began affectionately calling him Caligula, meaning little boots, in reference to the miniature soldier's uniform he wore, complete with scaled-down military boots. Though the nickname began as a term of endearment, it would later become the name history remembered him by. However, Caligula's childhood was tragically cut short in 19 CE when his father, Germanicus, died suddenly and under suspicious circumstances while in Syria. Only 33 years old at the time, Germanicus's death sent shockwaves through the Roman world. His popularity had made him a figure of hope for the empire, and many suspected foul play. Agrippina the Elder openly accused Emperor Tiberius of orchestrating her husband's death, but other historians suggest the possibility that Germanicus was poisoned by Sejanus, the powerful and ambitious Praetorian prefect who wielded significant influence in Tiberius's court. The aftermath of Germanicus's death was devastating for Caligula's family. Agrippina's feud with Tiberius grew increasingly dangerous, culminating in her eventual death under mysterious circumstances. Her defiance also led to a brutal purge that claimed the lives of Caligula's two older brothers, Nero and Drusus. Remarkably, young Caligula was spared. Likely seen as too young to be a threat, he was instead summoned to the island of Capri, where he lived under the watchful eye of Tiberius. Caligula's years on Capri were formative but fraught with tension. Essentially a hostage in the emperor's court, he lived in constant fear for his life. Tiberius's court was infamous for its decadence, paranoia, and cruelty, and the young Gaius had no choice but to navigate this perilous environment. Some historians believe that it was during this time that Caligula learned the political cunning, survival instincts, and ruthlessness that would later define his reign. A dramatic shift occurred in 31 CE when Sejanus, the most powerful man in Rome aside from Tiberius, was abruptly arrested and executed. Sejanus's fall marked a turning point in the empire's internal politics. Around this time, Tiberius was still mourning the death of his son, Drusus, so he began to turn his attention to Caligula. Despite the young man's precarious position, Tiberius named him his successor, setting the stage for Caligula's eventual rise to power. When Tiberius died in 37 CE, the circumstances surrounding his death immediately became a subject of speculation. Some rumors suggested that Caligula might have hastened the emperor's demise, though Tiberius was already 77 years old and in failing health. Whether by fate or intrigue, Caligula found himself at the helm of the Roman Empire, stepping into a role for which he had been groomed, yet one that would prove both challenging and transformative. What it means to be a Roman emperor. Rome was not a place for weak men, and any man who would have lived long enough to ascend to the throne as an emperor would have survived a youth full of luxury, tribulation, and politics. And by the time they got there, they would have become ruthless leaders capable of unimaginable deeds. Most leaders used this brute nature of theirs to forge their ambitions into reality and expand the Roman Empire, while others saw it as nothing but a throne of self-exaltation and a reason to do whatever their heart pleased, and Caligula's reign proved the type of Roman emperor he was. But despite having the upbringing and all the motives to be a self-gloating, underachieving pleasure indulger, his first few years as emperor proved otherwise. Despite his infamous reputation, Caligula's reign wasn't entirely devoid of positive contributions to Rome. Upon ascending to power, he completed several construction projects initiated by his predecessor, Tiberius, including temples and other important public works. He took on ambitious new endeavors as well, such as building aqueducts to secure Rome's growing water needs and even constructing a new amphitheater in Pompeii. Caligula also improved the port infrastructure of the capital, which proved crucial during a famine early in his reign. These upgrades facilitated increased grain imports from Egypt, helping to stabilize Rome's food supply during a critical period. However, as his reign progressed, Caligula's focus shifted toward more self-indulgent projects. He expanded the imperial palace into a grandiose complex and famously commissioned 2 massive floating pleasure barges at Lake Nemi, complete with luxurious amenities fit for an emperor. While these personal extravagances reflected his excesses, they also showcased the engineering marvels of the Roman Empire under his rule. But the first thing that showed he was unhinged is his obsession with worship. Treatment as a deity. Under Caligula, Rome descended into a reign of terror. Thousands were executed under his orders, and his obsession with power extended into the realm of religion. While most Roman leaders had grown less zealous about their pagan traditions, Caligula fully embraced and reverted to the ancient practices. He didn't stop there. He declared himself a living god, complete with temples, rituals, and statues erected in his honor. In his mind, being a deity came with some unique perks. As a god, he believed he was beyond accountability. To cement his godlike image, Caligula had the heads of various statues of Roman deities removed and replaced with his own likeness. This was a blatant display of his belief in his divine supremacy. In Rome, 2 temples were dedicated to the worship of Caligula. One of these, the Temple of Castor and Pollux, was even physically connected to his imperial residence. Caligula would occasionally appear there, presenting himself as a living god to the public in grand theatrical displays. But perhaps the most controversial act of his so-called divinity was his decree to place a statue of himself inside the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, a sacred place where no graven images were allowed. This was a deeply provocative act, echoing the events that had sparked the Hasmonean revolt 2 centuries earlier. Rebellion seemed inevitable. However, Caligula's childhood friend, Herod Agrippa I, stepped in. Having grown up alongside Caligula in Rome, Agrippa used their connection to plead with the emperor. Surprisingly, Caligula listened. The order was withdrawn, and Jerusalem became the one place in the empire where Caligula's statue did not appear. This rare moment of reason amid Caligula's madness likely prevented an outright revolt in Judea, but it didn't change the fact that his reign had become a dangerous mix of megalomania and terror. It wasn't enough for him to just be seen as a god. He wanted to demonstrate his supremacy over other gods. Among the many bizarre episodes that defined Caligula's reign, none stands out quite like his so-called War on Neptune. Around AD 39, while campaigning in Gaul, Caligula appeared poised to achieve a great military feat: the invasion of Britain. This would have been a monumental step for Rome, securing valuable resources and extending the empire's reach. But what unfolded on the shores of the English Channel baffled even his closest advisors. Instead of preparing his legions for a proper invasion, Caligula ordered them to line up along the coastline, not to battle an enemy army, but the sea itself. According to the historian Suetonius, the emperor commanded his soldiers to attack the waves with their swords, as though Neptune, the god of the sea, was their adversary. He instructed them to collect seashells from the shore, if that wasn't strange enough. These, he triumphantly declared, were the spoils of war trophies to symbolize his victory over the ocean. Caligula even had the loot transported back to Rome to display his conquest. This surreal episode, whether a calculated attempt to humiliate his troops or an unhinged display of megalomania, solidified Caligula's reputation as an emperor both feared and mocked. His war against Neptune wasn't just a demonstration of power, but a performance of madness. But his thirst for reverence might have been a way to compensate for his unappealing looks, something he was so insecure about he could kill because of it. Embarrassing insecurities. Not every Roman emperor cut the imposing figure of a statesman or warrior, and Caligula was a prime example of this. Despite being born into one of Rome's most illustrious families, his physical appearance was far from majestic. By his early 20s, the young emperor had developed a look that could charitably be described as unconventional. His pale, gaunt frame was overrun with unruly hair sprouting from his neck downward, giving him an unkempt and somewhat feral appearance. The Roman historian Suetonius, never one to mince words, offered a particularly cutting description of Caligula's looks. He was horribly pale, had the face of an old man, with gloomy, deep-set eyes. His head was deformed and bald, except for a few scanty hairs. His neck was covered with bristles. He had thin legs and enormous feet. Such vivid imagery leaves little doubt that Caligula's appearance fell far short of the Roman ideals of beauty and vigor, ideals that were often celebrated and even mythologized in art and literature. In a society where physical prowess and aesthetic appeal were closely tied to perceptions of strength and divine favor, Caligula's appearance became an easy target. His unkempt, hairy demeanor drew snickers and whispers, with many comparing him to a goat. And back then, being called a goat was not a compliment, rather it was an insult that stung deeply. For a man with absolute power over an empire, being the butt of such a humiliating joke was intolerable. Caligula reacted as only an insecure autocrat could. By legislating against mockery, he passed a law forbidding anyone from even mentioning goats in his presence. This bizarre decree only underscores how acutely he felt the sting of ridicule. However, the goat jokes weren't his only source of insecurity. Baldness, a trait that plagued many in his family line, began to manifest early in Caligula's life. Romans placed great cultural significance on a man's hair. A full head was seen as a sign of youth, vitality, and authority. Losing his hair prematurely was not only a personal blow, but also a public one, as it diminished his image as a powerful and virile ruler. To combat this, Caligula took extreme measures, issuing a decree that forbade anyone from standing higher than him or looking down on him as he passed. Whether this law was intended to obscure his receding hairline or to reinforce his dominance, it reveals a man deeply troubled by the perception of his physical shortcomings. Caligula's insecurities didn't stop at legislative decrees. Obsessed with projecting an image of fearsome authority, he reportedly practiced fierce and intimidating expressions in front of a mirror. This was no small task in an empire where an emperor's image could inspire either reverence or rebellion. Caligula's fixation on his appearance and its role in maintaining his grip on power paints a picture of a ruler whose ego was as fragile as his authority was absolute. These glimpses into Caligula's psyche reveal the contradictions of his rule. On one hand, he wielded immense power, commanding the lives of millions and dictating the fate of an empire. On the other, he was haunted by insecurities over his looks, his hairline, and the cruel barbs of those around him. The goat jokes, harmless as they may seem, struck at the very core of his fragile self-image. For a man as ruthless as Caligula, those jokes were no laughing matter. His reign was marked by tyranny, cruelty, and the elimination of those who crossed him, and one can only imagine the fates of those foolish enough to flout his edicts or mock him openly. Caligula ruled with an iron fist, but his physical insecurities revealed the chinks in his psychological armor, proving that even an emperor couldn't escape the weight of his own vanity. Killer entertainment. One thing Caligula loved above all else was being entertained, and he was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to ensure his amusement. In an era where spectacle and violence often intertwined, there was no greater source of entertainment than the gladiator games at the Colosseum, the grand arena that stood as a testament to Rome's wealth, power, and penchant for blood sport. Caligula never missed his share of gladiatorial combat. The emperor's attendance at these events was more than just a diversion. It was a performance of imperial power. He relished the ability to manipulate life and death from his elevated seat. But even that wasn't enough to satisfy his thirst for excitement. To make the games more exhilarating, he sometimes turned the audience itself into unwilling participants. Without hesitation, Caligula would order some of his guests to be thrown into the arena to face armed gladiators. This wasn't a rare occurrence. According to historical accounts, his targets ranged from ordinary citizens to Rome's elite. If his mood struck him, he would even toss senators into the arena to fight for their lives. For the members of Rome's ruling class, this wasn't just a matter of humiliation, it was a life-or-death struggle staged for Caligula's amusement. The thought of Rome's most powerful men being reduced to desperate combatants in a bloody spectacle only served to heighten the emperor's twisted delight. When the suffering of others still failed to quench his need for thrill, Caligula would take matters a step further by joining the action himself. Suetonius, one of Rome's most notable historians, recounts how Caligula didn't merely spectate, but occasionally stepped into the arena. In one infamous instance, he fought a gladiator named Mumillo, a match designed to showcase the emperor's supposed superiority. The duel was a farce from the outset. Mumillo, armed with nothing but a wooden sword, was powerless to challenge Caligula, who was armed and protected by his imperial status. At one point during the fight, Mumillo fell to the ground, a staged gesture of submission. But for Caligula, the performance was not complete without a shocking twist. Instead of showing mercy, he pulled out a real dagger and stabbed the gladiator to death, parading triumphantly around the arena afterward. The act wasn't merely about victory, it was a grotesque display of dominance, intended to remind everyone present that Caligula's power was absolute, extending even to the lives of those who entertained him. But Caligula's cruelty extended far beyond the arena floor. On sweltering summer days, when the Roman sun was at its most unforgiving, the Colosseum's vellum was a vast canvas awning designed to provide shade for the spectators, which was erected to shield the crowd from the oppressive heat. Caligula, however, found a sadistic pleasure in denying them this small comfort. Under his orders, the vellum would remain unused, forcing the audience to endure hours of scorching sunlight while they watched the brutal games below. For Caligula, this was no mere oversight. It was another calculated way to assert his power and inflict suffering on those beneath him. The searing discomfort of the spectators served as an extension of the spectacle, which served a reminder that their misery was as much a part of the entertainment as the blood spilled in the arena. To Caligula, the anguish of the masses was just another twisted amusement, a way to revel in his unchecked power and remind Rome of his authority. These actions paint a vivid picture of an emperor whose pursuit of entertainment blurred the line between spectacle and cruelty. For Caligula, the Colosseum was more than a venue. It was a stage for his most perverse displays of dominance, where no life, be it a senator, a gladiator, or an ordinary citizen, no one was safe from his whims. Dinner parties. Caligula's love for entertainment didn't stop at gladiator fights or theatrical displays. He was equally passionate about throwing the most extravagant parties Rome had ever seen. His palace became the epicenter of nightly revelry, a hub of indulgence and excess that left guests in awe. Music echoed through the halls as attendees feasted on the finest dishes prepared by Rome's most skilled chefs. Lavish spreads of food and drink ensured that no one ever went wanting. But Caligula's parties weren't just about food and music. These gatherings were spectacles of decadence, with guests dressed in their finest robes to suit the grandeur of the occasion. Yet for some, the experience went far beyond dining and dancing. Caligula, known for indulging his every whim, often singled out guests who caught his eye, compelling them to engage in intimate acts with him. As emperor, his authority was absolute, and refusal was unthinkable. His parties, therefore, were as much a display of his power as they were of his opulence. Caligula's flair for festivity wasn't confined to the walls of his palace. His love for celebration traveled with him, turning even his journeys into spectacles of revelry. Whether he was on a formal procession or simply relocating, he ensured that his surroundings were transformed into scenes of grand celebration. For Caligula, life itself was a stage, and he demanded that every moment be filled with indulgence, entertainment, and excess. While the opulence of these gatherings dazzled many, they also reflected the darker side of Caligula's rule. A leader who viewed his position not as a responsibility, but as a license to satisfy every desire, no matter the cost or consequence. These lavish parties became a hallmark of his reign, embodying both the heights of Roman extravagance and the depths of one man's unchecked power. An ancient party yacht. Caligula's passion for opulence and parties wasn't confined to the palaces of Rome, it extended to the open waters as well. The infamous Roman emperor commissioned enormous pleasure boats to float on Lake Nemi, located just outside Rome. These were no ordinary vessels. They were palatial structures adorned with marble statues, intricate mosaics, and even advanced plumbing systems for running water, a technological marvel of the time. Measuring an astounding 230, these floating havens of decadence were more akin to luxurious mansions than ships. But Caligula didn't stop at functionality. The boats were equipped with colorful sails, jewel-studded prows, lavish baths, dining rooms, and even gardens filled with fruit trees and vines. On these grand ships, the emperor indulged in days of revelry, drifting along the scenic shores of Campania while entertained by orchestras and choirs. The fate of these vessels is shrouded in mystery. While some accounts suggest they were deliberately sunk during one of Caligula's infamous drunken orgies, others hint at more natural causes. What we do know is that centuries later, archaeologists uncovered remnants of two of these magnificent ships, confirming the emperor's audacious vision. It's astonishing to think that these massive floating orgy palaces were built on a lake with a mere circumference of 3.5 miles. One big part of Caligula's personality that was on full display was how much of a freak he was, indulging in the most inappropriate of activities, and whenever he had a desire, he didn't care what the consequences were because there simply was none for him. Inappropriate relations. Caligula's personal life was as scandalous and shocking as the rest of his reign. His behavior at social gatherings and banquets became infamous, pushing the boundaries of decency and Roman norms. One notorious incident occurred when he attended the wedding of Gaius Piso to Livia Orestilla. Captivated by the bride, Caligula ordered her to be taken to his palace and declared that he had taken a wife in the tradition of Rome's legendary founders. This was less a romantic gesture and more a demonstration of his absolute power. At banquets, Caligula took his disregard for boundaries even further. Husbands would often bring their wives, but these gatherings were anything but ordinary. The emperor would openly assess the women in attendance, and if one caught his eye, he would leave the banquet with her. Upon his return, Caligula had no qualms about openly discussing the encounters, much to the embarrassment of everyone present. His intimate relationships extended far beyond banquets. Caligula was said to compel women from all walks of life to be with him, whether they wanted to or not. This disregard for consent was another reflection of his authoritarian control, as few dared to defy the most powerful man in Rome. Caligula's personal life also crossed cultural boundaries in other ways. Stories of his closeness with his sisters, especially Drusilla, sparked widespread gossip. While some accounts might have been exaggerated, Caligula did little to dismiss these rumors. On the contrary, he seemed to embrace them, possibly to align himself with the divine traditions of figures like the Olympian gods or the Ptolemies of Egypt, who were known for similar behavior. Another aspect of Caligula's private life that raised eyebrows was his relationships with hostages of royal blood. These individuals were sent to Rome as a form of political diplomacy, ensuring the loyalty of their families. While hostages were often treated well and educated, they were not expected to endure the emperor's personal interests. Caligula's actions, however, blurred those lines, turning a diplomatic practice into something far more unsettling. Even in his attire, Caligula defied Roman conventions. He was known to dress as both gods and goddesses, as well as cross-dress in ways that shocked Roman society. Clothing in Rome was deeply symbolic of one's status, and Caligula's disregard for these norms was a deliberate act to challenge and unsettle those around him. These behaviors painted a picture of an emperor who saw himself not just as a ruler, but as a being above all human laws and traditions. Whether driven by a desire for absolute control, a belief in his own divinity, or simply a penchant for chaos, Caligula's actions left a legacy of scandal and fear that continues to fascinate the world today. Hostility towards his Senate. Caligula's relationship with the Roman Senate was a masterclass in disdain, mockery, and unchecked domination. While previous emperors at least maintained the pretense of working alongside the Senate, Caligula tossed this charade aside and instead turned his interactions with them into a spectacle of humiliation. Among his many outrageous acts, none stood out more than his infamous proposal to make his beloved horse, Incitatus, a consul. At first glance, this might appear to be an eccentric act of affection toward a pet, and indeed, Caligula lavished Incitatus with luxuries fit for royalty. The horse lived in a marble stall, adorned with gold and jewels, dined on oats mixed with flakes of gold, and even had its own household of servants to cater to its every whim. But the proposal to elevate Incitatus to one of Rome's highest political offices was far more than just an expression of love for the animal. For many, this was perceived as an insult to the Senate, a vivid declaration of their perceived impotence. In proposing to make a horse a consul, Caligula was essentially saying, "You're so ineffectual that even a horse could fulfill your duties." The act was a bold and deliberate mockery of the Senate's dwindling authority, and it reinforced the message that ultimate power rested solely with the emperor. However, this bizarre episode also offers a glimpse into Caligula's increasingly erratic state of mind. By this point in his reign, his behavior had become so unpredictable and bizarre that what might have begun as a joke seemed to morph into a genuine possibility in his eyes. Some historians suggest that this act reflected the emperor's deteriorating mental health, which manifested in grandiose and irrational decisions. The story of Incitatus also ties into Caligula's admiration for the absolute power of Hellenistic monarchies, particularly the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt. These rulers were often deified, embodying a godlike status that allowed them to govern without question. Caligula yearned for this kind of authority, which clashed sharply with Rome's traditional republican values. To the Senate, steeped in the legacy of the Republic, Caligula's actions were not only insulting, but also deeply un-Roman, a stark deviation from the carefully balanced relationship between emperor and Senate established by Augustus. But Caligula didn't stop at mockery. He ensured that the Senate lived in constant fear of his wrath. Senators who dared to oppose or even displease him often found themselves accused of treason and swiftly executed. His reign became a time of paranoia for Rome's political elite, as Caligula flaunted his authority with open contempt. Compared to his predecessors, who maintained a veneer of collaboration, Caligula's approach was brutally clear. Rome had one ruler, and everyone else existed at his mercy. This toxic blend of mockery, cruelty, and unrestrained autocracy painted Caligula as a ruler unlike any other in Rome's history. He was a man who saw himself as untouchable, even divine. His audacious actions, whether driven by calculated dominance or unstable mental health, only deepened the growing resentment and paranoia surrounding his reign, ultimately sowing the seeds of his downfall. Demise. On January 24, 40 CE, after 4 years as emperor, Caligula was assassinated by his guards. The plotters murdered the emperor, his wife, and his daughter to prevent any possibility of a legitimate successor. The senators briefly considered the abolition of the monarchy and the restoration of the republic. But then, one of the praetorians found Caligula's uncle Claudius cowering behind a curtain and hailed him the new emperor. Claudius appointed a new praetorian prefect and executed the centurions involved. He allowed Sabinus to commit suicide. Claudius refused the Senate's requests to formally declare Caligula an enemy of the public, to condemn his memory. He also turned down a proposal to officially condemn all the Caesars and destroy their temples. Caligula's name was removed from the official lists of oaths and dedications. Some inscriptions were removed or obliterated. Most of his statues had the heads recut to resemble Augustus or Claudius, or in one case, Nero, who would suffer a similar fate. Caligula's reign may have been short, but his bizarre and shocking behavior left a lasting impact on history. From his twisted sense of power to his outrageous actions, he truly redefined what it meant to rule with absolute authority. Which habit of Caligula shocked you the most? Let us know in the comment section.
Some caves are dark and mysterious, hiding secrets deep within their walls. Others are breathtakingly beautiful. Today, we journey through some of the most fascinating and mysterious caves around the world. One sea cave is known for its strange echoes, where crashing waves create haunting sounds. While another glows with an almost magical light. But first, let's visit a cave where water has carved stunning patterns into the stone. Marble caves. While there are many natural wonders in the world, some locations appear to have been impacted by pure magic. One of these, called Marble Caves, is tucked away in Chile, where rock and water have combined for centuries to produce something genuinely amazing. The Marble Caves are a complex network of tunnels, arches, and pillars that are found along the shores of General Carrera Lake. They aren't ordinary rock formations, though. These caves are made of marble, formed by a slow but powerful process. Over millions of years, water from the lake flowed through calcium-rich rocks. It shaped smooth surfaces and winding passages. This place's story started long before humans existed. Around 200 million years ago, during the Jurassic period, the Andes Mountains began to rise. Shifts deep within the earth caused this movement. Over time, rivers and melting glaciers eroded the high peaks. They left sediment and calcium carbonate deposits in present-day General Carrera Lake. This sediment turned into limestone. Limestone is a rock made mostly of calcium carbonate from the remains of tiny sea creatures. As more pressure and time passed, the limestone transformed into marble. It was this marble, already millions of years old, that met the persistent waters of the lake. The result was a landscape